A Song for Silas by Laurie Wick. Chapter 42. Silas's thoughts were identical to Amy's. The crops are in. Another day and I need to go home, and this time I have no reason to come back. Silas wanted to weep just thinking about it. He found himself practically begging God to give him some time with Amy. Certain that he knew how she felt, Silas just needed to talk with her for a spell. It might be the last time for quite a while. The time came that very morning, the day before he was scheduled to leave. The weather was turning cold, and after spending days with canning and putting her garden up, along with the stress of Bev's pain, Amy felt a desperate need to be outdoors before winter set in and made being outside miserable. The big oaks at the top of the bluff looked inviting, and Amy bundled herself from head to toe and set out for her favorite spot. She'd been sitting on a fallen log for less than half an hour when Silas joined her. They sat in companionable silence for a time, both feeling good that talk wasn't needed. The surrounding bluffs and farms stretched out before them, almost creating a valley. From their vantage point, it was hard to believe there was life beyond the houses and fields they could see. And with the world so quiet and cold on this morning, it was even harder to believe people were hurting and life was not peaceful for everyone. Silas eventually turned his head from the view and looked at Amy's profile. Amy, feeling his look, turned and let her eyes meet his. "I'm leaving tomorrow." Silas didn't know why he said it. She already knew. "I'll miss you." "Will you, Amy? Will you really?" Her heart ached at hearing the wistfulness in his voice, and she answered very gently, "Yes, I'll miss you very much." She continued to look at him, and Silas believed he would drown in the crystal blue of her eyes. As before, at the train station, he moved slowly, giving her plenty of time to see his intent and draw away. Amy's heart melted within her as his lips touched hers, and Silas felt as though his own heart was going to pound through his coat as she leaned closer and didn't pull away. 1 second they were kissing, and the next second Amy was gone. Silas stared up at her from his place on the log. She had leapt up and was staring at him with tortured eyes, her hands clenched so tightly together that her knuckles were white. Silas stood and reached for her as he spoke. "Amy, please, don't touch me, Silas. Just don't touch me." Standing in front of the log and holding his place, Silas spoke. "Amy, you must know how I feel. You must know that my feelings for you are deep. And you, Amy, what about you? Please don't ask me to believe you don't feel anything for me." "Of course I feel something for you. We're friends." The words sounded foolish and inane even to her own ears, but Amy couldn't seem to help herself. Silas looked furious. "Is that what you were just now, when you let me kiss you? A friend?" Amy shrugged helplessly, not even knowing herself why she had allowed the kiss. Silas drug off his cap, and Amy watched him rake his hands through his hair, his frustration more than evident. Suddenly, Amy felt angry and frustrated too. Taking him completely by surprise, Amy boldly stepped forward and pushed as hard as she could on his chest. Normally, he would have hardly noticed the relatively slight pressure she put on him, but he was so surprised by her action that he took a step backward, forgot the log, and fell over it and onto his back. "What did you do that for?" he bellowed from his indignified sprawl on the ground. "Because you've ruined everything. We were such good friends, and you've just ruined it," Amy cried in pure frustration. Silas was off the ground in an instant, knowing his brother Paul had been right. Even as Amy had shouted at him in rage, she had seen the fear written across her face. Amy retreated as he came toward her, and Silas stalked her until she was backed up against a tree. His expression was fierce, but his voice was calm. "Take a good look at me, Amy Nolan, a very good look. I am not Thomas Blaine. I am not going to declare my love for you and then marry someone else." Silas's look grew extremely tender as they both stood still, his eyes drinking in the woman he loved. He cupped her face within his big hands before he spoke his next words. "I love you, Amy. I love you as I've never loved anyone. You would but need to crook your smallest finger in my direction, and I would gladly carry you down this hill to the parsonage and make you my wife today." Silas felt as if a giant hand had reached into his chest and was attempting to squeeze the life out of his heart. So great was his disappointment when Amy did not respond to his avowal of love. Silas straightened and moved a few steps away from Amy, his voice, if not his face, betraying his anguish. "I'll be taking one of your horses to the train in the morning. I'll leave it, with the livery, nearest the depot." Turning as though he would walk back to the house, Silas hesitated. Amy hadn't moved away from the tree, and Silas didn't look at her as he spoke. "Long after I get home, I'll love you. If by some miracle you realize you can return that love, know that I'll welcome you with open arms and an open heart." Amy was very cold inside and outside by the time she allowed Amy was very cold inside and out by the time she followed Silas down the bluff and back to the house. And for the first time she could remember, she did not feel like singing at the sight of her home.